Every year, I like to rank the F1 drivers at the start of the season in terms of how good I think they are. So this is different than my predictions, which are based on that particular season. This is overall, and then I like to track it throughout the year. So I rank them again at the mid-season and then again at the end to see how my perception of them as drivers has changed. So without further ado, let's start the ranking. As per usual, this will be by a tier list. So categories this year are champ material, one thing missing, reliable, something to prove, and last chance. First up, we have McLaren and Oscar Piastri. And for me, Oscar is going in one thing missing. I think Oscar has the talent to be world champion, and for me, that is what the top two categories are for, who I think has the potential to be a world champion. But the thing missing for Oscar is experience and a little bit of pace in qualifying. Other than that, I think he has the mindset, I think he has the talent in order to be an F1 world champion. Next up is the other McLaren driver, Lando Norris, and I am throwing him in champ material this year. Last year, I had him in one thing missing, and that one thing missing was a race win. Until I saw Lando get a race win, I think I felt that that would be hanging over his head. Now that he's also got a little bit of a championship battle under his belt, I think he has all of the tools and all of the experience to be able to put a full championship winning fight together. But whether or not he is able to put everything together or not, or if he will fall apart at the seams, will be seen this season. I think McLaren have the best car, so that's no longer missing for him anymore. And it's all up to Lando on putting it all together this year. Next up, I have Charles Leclerc, and for me, Charles is also in champ material. I think this might be one of the first years where Charles actually has a car that might be able to win the Drivers' Championship. I think that was the case at the start of 2022. But then Ferrari fell apart and Charles made a couple mistakes and that season kind of fell apart for him. But now I think he has the consistency, he has the qualifying pace, he has the race pace, and he might have the car to be able to win the championship this year. I have him ahead of Lando because I think I trust Charles to not make a mistake now more than I trust Lando. For the same reason. I think Charles in 2024 really took those silly crashes out of his repertoire. I think he figured out when to push the car to its limit and when to kind of back off it a little bit, and we didn't see any of those major crashes in 2024. So if Charles can keep that up, I think he has all of the talent to be able to win the Drivers' Championship. All right, next up is the other Ferrari driver, Lewis Hamilton. And Lewis is going in champ material. He almost always does unless he doesn't have the car, and this year I think he does. However, I have him below Charles and Lando. This might be a bit of a take because Lewis obviously in the past would be probably number one on this list, debatable between him and Max. But I think right now there are a lot of question marks with Lewis around his qualifying pace. I think this year in particular, it might be tough for him to put a full championship fight together, but you can never count him out. And so I still have him in champ material, but behind Charles and Lando, who I think as of right now have more tools than Lewis does in their arsenal. Based on where we might be at the mid-season, this could change, or even at the end of the season, but right now going into the season, just a few more question marks with Lewis than the other two. Next up is Max Verstappen, and at this point, you just gotta put him as the best driver on the grid. There's no argument at the moment. The only question mark you could have with Max this year is whether or not he has the car, but even if he has the third best car, he still has the potential of winning the championship. So yeah, in terms of talent and overall package, Max just has everything, and you cannot count him out at all. So it is up to the other 3 drivers in this category to see if they can take the championship from him, because he's had the last 4 straight and he's looking to make it 5 in a row. Next up is Liam Lawson, and I have Liam in Something to Prove. I think Liam has shown that he has the talent for F1, especially in 2023. I think he did a really good job filling in for Daniel Ricciardo, but 2024, I think he showed a little bit too much volatility, and I think he got into a few skirmishes with other drivers. And if that kind of behavior continues, then I kind of worry for his future. But I think that he will do a better job than Sergio Perez in that Red Bull, and as long as he does that, I think he should stay in that seat. But I think he has to prove that he deserves to have that Red Bull seat alongside Max Verstappen. Next up, we're going into the Mercedes drivers, and we have George Russell. And George, I am putting in one thing missing. I think George has proven to be one of the best qualifiers on the grid. However, his race pace leaves something to desire. We saw several times in 2024 that he would be far ahead of Lewis in qualifying, but by the end of the race, they would be finishing right next to each other. And I think it just shows that George still has a little bit of work to do on that end. But other than that, I think apart from not having a good car, I think he's a little bit of a step behind some of these other drivers in terms of that race pace. Sometimes I think that it might be because he was stuck at the back of the grid in that Williams for a few seasons, that he hasn't quite had the experience battling with other drivers that some of the other drivers in these top 2 categories did. But I think George has the talent to get it there. I also think one thing missing is that sometimes he can kind of lose it at the end of a race. We've seen him have a last lap crash a couple times in the last few seasons, and so I think he needs to iron out those mistakes as well. Next up is Kimi Antonelli, and I do think that Kimi has the talent to be able to get into the top 2 categories, but as of right now, I need to see a little bit more from him behind an F1 wheel, so I'm putting him in reliable because I don't think he has much to prove as a rookie. I think the talent is already there. It's something that we have already seen from him. He just needs to get settled, get some of that experience, and then hopefully he'll be in champ material within a few years here. Next up are the Aston Martin drivers, and first is Fernando Alonso. And Fernando obviously has the talent to be in the champ material category, but what I think he's lacking right now is the car, and I'm worried about how much his age has impacted his abilities at this point. It's been a couple seasons since we've seen him perform at his peak level, so I'm very curious to see where he'll be at in 2026 when that Aston Martin car might be one of the better ones on the grid. But right now, I think he can only do so much in those Aston Martins, and so it's tough to really say where he's at. So I have him between Oscar and George. And on the other side of the coin is Lance Stroll, who, as much as I would love to throw him in last chance, he's going in Something to Prove because it's never Lance's last chance. He's had about 50 chances and still has not proven that he has the talent to be able to get a world championship. He likes to think that he does, but I just haven't seen it from him yet. I don't know if it's just because he's in a mediocre car and doesn't have the motivation to push it to the limit, but even if he gets a championship winning car, I don't know if he has what it takes to take it through. So he's going in Something to Prove because he needs to prove that he is more than a Nepo baby. and that is endlessly where Lance is on my rankings. Next up is Pierre Gasly, and he is going in reliable ahead of Kimi for now. Pierre did fantastically well at the end of the 2024 season. He's always shown that he is a very, very, very good qualifier. I think his race pace leaves something to be desired, but he definitely has the skill to put that car in a good place, and as long as he can hold on, then I think he'll do quite well in that Williams. But I think he proved when he was next to Max in that Red Bull that he doesn't quite have what it takes to be a championship contender, so that's why he's not in the top 2 categories. Next up is the other current Alpine driver, and that is Jack Doohan, and Jack is unfortunately going in last chance. It's pretty well known at this point that he does not have a very long leash for that Alpine seat, and unless he does something spectacularly amazing in his first 5 races, then it might be a very short-lived F1 career for Jack, which is unfortunate. So yeah, he's in the last chance category because I think it might be his only chance, and it's not looking like it's going to be one that lasts very long. So unfortunate for Jack, because I do think that he deserves a little bit more of a chance, but unfortunately F1 can be a very brutal sport sometimes. So next up is the guy that is touted to replace Jack. I have decided to include him in this tier list because it is so certain that he's going to replace him at some point this year, and so I want to have him on this tier list to compare later on this season. Franco is going in something to prove between Liam and Lance. I think Franco kind of stormed into F1 when he first got that Williams seat last year and did a fantastic job in his first few races, managed to get more points than Logan Sargent did over a full season and a half. So he's clearly got the skill there, but then the crashes started to happen, and so that kind of started to make people question him a little bit. But I think in an Alpine car that looks like it's going to be easier to drive, or at least more so than the Williams was last year, we'll have to see if he does better. So yeah, something to prove that he can drive a car and not crash it. So those were the 3 Alpine drivers, and now we'll move on to Haas. And first up is Esteban Ocon, and Esty Bestie is going in reliable just behind his nemesis Pierre. I think I rate Pierre a little bit higher than Esty just based on his qualifying pace, but I do think that Esteban has a little bit superior race pace than Pierre, which I think was why they were always so close together in the finishing order last year. I think Esteban was a great pickup for Haas. I think he'll do really well there, and he seems to be a little bit rejuvenated, but I think Esteban doesn't quite have what it takes to be champ material. So I have him in the reliable category. Next up is Ollie Behrman, and Ollie for me is going in reliable just ahead of Kimi. The only reason I have him ahead of Kimi is just that little bit extra experience that Ollie has over Kimi in an F1 car, and I think Ollie has really impressed Haas with how calm and how good at providing feedback Ollie has been, and so I think he's already proven to be someone that can be relied upon more so than other rookies, and so that's why I have him in the reliable category. Next up is Yuki, and Yuki has finally graduated into the reliable category. I don't think I had him in this category to start 2024, but I think that season he really proved that he can be level-headed behind the wheel and put in consistent performances, and so I think Yuki has proven to be a reliable F1 driver at this point in his career, but I am a bit worried for his prospects for next year in terms of a seat because the Honda relationship has dried up with Red Bull, and so there's potential for him to leave that program, and there aren't very many seats available in other parts of the grid. So here's to hoping that Yuki can figure something out for next year, but yeah, I think he's kind of proven to be a reliable F1 driver at this point. Next up is the other Racing Bulls driver this year, and that is Isaac Hadjar. And Isaac, I am throwing in something to prove just behind Lance. I think Isaac has done very well in the junior series leading up to F1. However, he has let the pressure get to him sometimes. I think he lost out on a championship in both of those series. And so what Isaac needs to prove is that he can handle the pressure of F1. And so that is the biggest question mark I have around him. And I think he has to prove that he can keep up to Yuki as well, because I think we've seen him in a lot of practice sessions in F1, and I haven't really seen much from him to suggest that he has the skills. So I think he has quite a bit to prove. Next up is Carlos Sainz, and Carlos is going at the top end of reliable. He has been in so many teams around F1. He has accumulated so much knowledge and skills from all of these different teams, and I'm sure Williams are very excited to have someone like that on their team. But I think we just saw from Carlos that he doesn't quite have the talent level that some of the drivers ahead of him do, and it seems like the opportunities at those top teams might be starting to wear thin. It seems like Red Bull doesn't want him, Ferrari have just dropped him, and Mercedes didn't want him either. And so I think what's missing for him is a top drive, and there's just something about Carlos that has forced him to have to move teams so often. He hasn't been one of those talents that a team has been wanting to hold on to. So it's unfortunate for him. I think he is a very hard-working and very smart driver, but I think that X factor is just missing for Carlos, and so that's why I have him in reliable and not one of the other categories. Next up is his Williams teammate, Alex Albon, and Alex I have just behind Esteban. I think Alex has shown that he can put in fantastic performances in that Williams car. I do think there are some question marks with him this year though, because we're finally going to see him up against a very capable teammate in Carlos Sainz. And so we'll have to see if Alex manages to keep it together, because I could see potential for him to drop into the lower categories this year if he does not. I would also like Albon to be a little bit more consistent. I think that's something that's kind of missing from his racecraft, and so that's why I have him behind the Carloses, the Pierres, and the Estebans. But I think at this point he's a pretty established F1 driver, so it would take a lot for him to be dropped. And finally, the Sauber drivers. First up is Gabriel Bortoleto, and Gabby is going in something to prove. I have him a little bit ahead of Franco, mainly because he finished ahead of Franco, at least in the F1 championship, at least up to the point that Franco was still in it. I also think that Gabby is a proven winner with wins in both F3 and F2, so he certainly has the pedigree to be able to do well in F1, but I think we haven't seen too much from him behind an F1 car. So I'm hoping that with some more experience, he'll be able to show the talent that he has. I do think he's in a position that has the least pressure of all of the F1 rookies this year, apart from maybe Ollie Behrman. And so he does have a good opportunity here to prove that he is F1 worthy. And I don't have much doubt that he'll be able to get it done, although the doubt is there because there it always is with rookies. So I almost always put the rookies in something to prove, but I think he has what it takes to do well, and so he just has to put it all together. And finally, the last driver on our list is Nico Hülkenberg, and Nico is going in reliable, just behind Alex. The drivers ahead of Nico here have a little bit more race pace than Nico does. I think Nico really excels in qualifying, especially in that Haas car last year. He did a great job, but it just seemed like there were so many races where it would kind of fall apart from him. And we've often seen this in his career where when he has a chance at a podium, it all just kind of falls apart. So I think Nico has somehow managed to make this F1 comeback stay on, and has outlasted drivers that have beat him in the past, like a Daniel Ricciardo. But yeah, I think he's a pretty reliable set of hands at this point, and I have no doubt that he'll be able to point this Sauber turning Audi team in the right direction. So those are the 21 drivers for the 2025 preseason ranking. I have listed them all here from 1 to 21, and once again I will rate them at the midpoint and endpoint of the season to see how things change. Obviously Jack Doohan may or may not be on the list come mid-season, and all the same goes for Franco, but I included them both here just so that I have something to compare them to by the midpoint of the season. So let me know in the comments down below if you agree with my rankings, if there's any that you would change. Sometimes the category names that I have don't quite match with kind of where they're at, but I try and place them in order of their talent, and this is kind of where I'm at with that. So excited for the start of the F1 season. It should be rolling around here soon. We've got Drive to Survive coming up, and so you can expect a bunch of content from me for that. So see you all around. Toodles.